Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Week 5 in the books. Moving on to week 6. Time to update the top 25 rankings. And Dill, a lot of movement, right? Ole Miss going down at home against Kentucky. Obviously, Alabama edging out Georgia. Look, I'm not trying to overreact to 1 week college football. We're starting to learn a lot about these college football teams as we go through the 2024 season. Fired up to get into this one. These are my rankings, not Dill's. He's, I'm sure, going to pick them apart. Now, before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. Dill, updating the top 25 every single week. It's been a war zone in the comment section. I wouldn't want to have it any other way. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Let it fly in the comment section. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's dig into this. Now we're going with our tiers as usual. Title contenders 1 through 5, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, Tennessee, Georgia. Now, I kept Georgia, even with the one loss, in the title contender category because at the end of the day, man, like, you watch that second half, like, that's the Georgia team that I think we expected to show up in Tuscaloosa. Do we have question marks about the Georgia Bulldogs following that football game? Yeah, absolutely. That being said, Dill, Alabama taking over that number 1 spot.
Yeah, and I'll start off with immediate disagreement. I don't know how Texas is number 1. And I look at, frankly, how Texas and Alabama match up and maybe some of Alabama's concerns in the secondary because there were some shots, and Georgia didn't even make all the plays I think they could have made. They started to make them in the second half, but I mean, you think that play to Arian Smith, I mean, that's there. There maybe struggles playing the ball in the air, I'll say, for Alabama. Has me very concerned with what they're going to do against the Texas offense that I think has a little bit more firepower, frankly, than what Georgia has.
Yeah, and I think with Texas, you could certainly argue Texas staying at the number 1 spot. To me, it was what win was more impressive, like Alabama and what they did against Georgia or what Texas did on the road against Michigan. Dill, I think it's important to realize, like, Michigan was going with Davis Warren. I think Michigan, the AP poll has them as a top 10 team in the country. I'm certainly not there with Michigan just yet. At the end of the day, I went with the team that has the more impressive win. But I think more importantly, Dill, we've rarely seen Georgia just look lost on the defensive side of the football. That's what Kalen DeBoer brought this Alabama pro. It is very clear to me that Jalen Milroe is significantly more confident operating in this Kalen DeBoer offense than he was in 2023 under Nick Saban. You got Jalen Milroe playing and not thinking. And I think that is a massive storyline for this Alabama team. Yeah, Texas, Alabama, 2 very good programs, but give me Alabama from what I saw on the offensive side of the football. Dill, what about Tennessee? Like, are we kind of in on Tennessee being a legitimate title contender in this tier here?
Oh, yeah, and I'm perfectly comfortable there because, frankly, I mean, I get we can argue Georgia came back in that game, but I think that's kind of like a misconception almost people have is like those teams that do get blown out in the first half and then kind of inch their way back. I don't think that tells the whole story when you look at the final score. I think it's much more important to be kind of wall-to-wall competitive than like making a big run because at the end of the day, football changes when you're up 28 or whatever it was, 30.
I totally agree with that take. What I'm kind of hanging on to is the second half from what you got from both sides of the football, the Georgia offense and the Georgia defense. Like, that's what we expected from this Georgia program. They showed you.
Well, I'll be honest. I still have a lot of concerns about that offense. I know, like, they put some points up, but, like, there isn't, like, something they can go to. And Carson Beck still looked at times very flustered in that side. I mean, that they got to find a number 1 guy who they really trust, who can get the ball in big crunch time moments. And I don't feel like they've found that. I think we've been thinking, can they find it? Can they? I don't think it's happening. At this point, I'm getting a little concerned that it just doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, they're not the same offense they were even last year with Brock
Bowers. 2 things. One, you're right. They are definitely still going through some growing pains in terms of replacing Ladd and Brock. I think more importantly, like, that's back-to-back weeks because you go back before the bye week where, like, Carson Beck didn't look like himself against Kentucky too. Like, we very rarely saw Carson Beck just, like, utterly confused on the football field. You've seen that back-to-back.
He's not even on the same page enough with, like, his receivers there. There's just something like they're not executing on offense. That's 2 straight weeks. And now frankly, you go back to that first half against Clemson, like, it wasn't exactly pretty in its own right either. Clemson.
Would you keep Georgia in the title contender tier? Or are you
I think
You're bumping them down.
I have them in the playoff teams. I think they need to now put a game together that really reasserts themselves, because that's too straight. You can deal with like a bad Kentucky game, but I'm not sure this offense really.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they have what it takes, frankly, to just go beat teams like Tennessee, Texas, like those teams that are really going to fill it up.
We've seen it for that one half against Clemson in the second half. Like outside of that, you haven't seen a totally complete game from the Georgia offense. And Dill, the rushing attack isn't necessarily what we're used to seeing from this Georgia offense, too. That's always been something they can kind of lean on to right the ship. That wasn't something Georgia felt comfortable leaning on against that in that game against Alabama, partially because they were down 28-0 in a blink of an eye. Let's go to the playoff teams. Dill, my Oregon Ducks, and I say my Oregon Ducks because they were a preseason darling of mine, climbing their way back up. And I think a lot of people just aren't really watching Oregon's football games. And so I think they look at the score and just kind of assume, all right, it ain't that great. They're coming along. There are certain aspects of this football team that I really like, starting with that front seven. Like we said, what does it take for Oregon to be a true national title contender, having a dominant front seven? They didn't have that last year. I think they have that this year, or at least a significantly upgraded front seven in this Oregon defense. The Oregon defense in general has been great. The offense has been fits and starts, which I'm willing to kind of look past because you have a new quarter. You're replacing Bo Nix, and Bo Nix was such a field general for that offense. I think it's taking Dylan Gabriel and offensive coordinator Will Stein to kind of find their rhythm. There's plenty of firepower on this Oregon offense where I'm kind of sitting there and saying they'll be just fine. But we're going to find out real quick because they play Ohio State in a couple weeks.
And frankly, you look at these next three teams, they all need to prove something. I mean, we've
Yeah.
seen them like kind of roll through some bad teams. We've seen them struggle with some teams they shouldn't really struggle against in all three cases. So, again, they'll get their shots. So Oregon will play Ohio State. Penn State's going to play Ohio State. Clemson's going to play. Miami's going to play Clemson, I believe, at some point. So,
And the ACC champion. Dill, I look at Miami and Clemson and say, like, those are the teams in the ACC. I don't really see. I think there's like a clear.
they'll both get their shot, I think, to prove what they are. If Miami goes out, plays a really, really, really good game against Clemson, I'd be very comfortable putting them right up in that title contender. But again, given what Miami's been through for the past 3 years and maybe some of the issues we've seen with them making it happen in big spots, I still want to see it. So I'm comfortable leaving them down there. Penn State, kind of similar vibe, frankly. Like, yeah, that's a really good team, still a really, really loaded defense. But I still want to see that offense play a good
So my take on Penn State was I questioned. I was like, how good is this Penn State defense? That was kind of my question mark after the first couple of weeks. Still watching that football game back Saturday night.
Yeah,
yeah, it's still good. You did.
I will say I probably would have Clemson and Missouri over Penn State right now, just because I still have some lingering questions about that offense. It's not like they were going up and down the field on Illinois. And Illinois is a really, really solid team, but I don't think they're that great, to be perfectly honest. Like, I look at what the talent is on that roster. It's really not close to some of these teams like a Tennessee or Georgia. I mean, they're
I feel like Clemson in Missouri, you still have question marks. I think that's kind of the separator, right? Like, you look at the top teams, like, there ain't many question marks. It's just like, can you get their best football in the biggest moments? You go down to those playoff teams, there's kind of a question mark for each of these teams. But I would say for Clemson, like, I think I'm high. Like, I got Clemson as a top 10 team. I don't think many people across the country have that. Dill, we've seen this Clemson offense take massive strides in terms of being explosive. Now I'm starting to question like the quality of teams like NC State, certainly not the team that we thought they were going to be. Stanford, not that good of a football team. Obviously, App State. So you've seen them have really good offensive performances, but you haven't really seen them do it against quality competition. And then Missouri, like we both love Missouri. I think we're going to get our answers from Missouri when they go on the road to play.
Yeah, I still am much more comfortable about Missouri. Like, yeah, they haven't played particularly great, but that's an offense I have no doubt can score on anyone. I just look like they have the pieces, they have the talent. I think Cook's a good enough quarterback. Luther Burden obviously is a good enough wide receiver along with everyone else. And that offensive line, I don't have any doubts they can score on anyone in the country if they're playing well. So that's why I probably have them higher than a lot of people, just because I look at the pieces. Like, again, are there some things on defense? Maybe like you want to see a little bit more athleticism from that front seven. Yeah, running quarterbacks have hurt them in a couple of games now. But I still look really, really good secondary, and they're a team that I think is going to be able to score on anyone they play. I don't think you can say the same about, frankly, Miami or no, Miami is going to score on anyone, but
Yeah, oh
Clemson
yeah.
and Penn State.
Yeah, and you look at Missouri and just say like that's kind of how we describe them coming into the season. Like, we're just checking a lot of boxes with Missouri. I think the question is, do they have that elite top end talent on both sides of the football? You know, they have it on offense with Brady Cook and Luther Burden, but do they have it on defense to be, that title contender tier? Dill, USC, I'm buying stock. Like, I think Lincoln Riley, this feels like a different USC team than even the teams that we saw with Caleb Williams. Like, they're playing really good defense. That is back-to-back performances in the second half where this defense has come out and really just dominated. But they still have a massive question mark in my mind too, and that's pass protection. Like, how does that translate? We saw it rear its ugly head when they played Michigan and Ann Arbor. If you want to beat some of the top teams in the Big Ten or across the country, like, look at all the teams above them. Like, there are some really good defensive lines that USC will have to go through at some point during the season. The offensive line has been a problem in pass protection. That's kind of the question mark we have about USC. The fascinating one, Dill, Ole Miss.
No, I haven't bumped off Ole Miss at all. I think you probably are.
You
I probably
have to bump
they're
off a
better than
little
USC.
bit.
Oh no, I mean like a little bit, but I still think they can win the national title. I saw someone in a comments on an Ole Miss South Carolina video we did, like a preview. Someone said like they weren't in control of that football game. I couldn't disagree more. I honestly think they really should have won that. In most worlds, they do win that game. I mean, missed kicks, giving up a 4th and 10, like those type of plays that just can't go against them, seemingly all went against them. And Kentucky played a perfect game in a sense. So, I mean, kudos to Kentucky, but that's still a team that, again, I think the fact that their defense, I feel like, is pretty legit. I really like
Yes.
the front seven. They're really athletic. They're disruptive. And their secondary is really, really good too. I think the defense is good. And like now the concern is the offense. And saying this 6 months ago, I'd be like, no way. They'll be fine on offense. They're always fine. But
Well,
the
that's
Lane
kind
Kiffin
of
needs to figure out how to get some other guys involved other than Trey Harris, because it can't look like that anymore.
That's kind of my take. Is I have Ole Miss high as well because the defense had 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. Like, they dominated Kentucky on the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the football. The offensive line, I think, reared its ugly head at points. Like, I would have question marks about the Ole Miss offensive line going up against some of the top teams in the SEC. But like you said, there was the offense that lost them this football game. With the caveat being, Dill, like, I look at this offense, I look at Lane Kiffin and say, I ain't that concerned about the offense. You just got to go back to the drawing board. And look,
Well,
we
and
always,
again, they fumble in the red zone. They have some things
yeah,
go against them that you really, I mean, can't have when you want to win those type of games, those close games. But
we had
I'm
that
still
game
pretty
on,
good with Ole Miss.
and I'm watching and saying, like, I was never really nervous about Ole Miss losing that football game until that last drive when Kentucky just got a few plays to go their way, and that's what
They got
happens.
one play. They got that 4th and
That's what
7.
happens when you let teams hang around. Like, it comes down to 1 or 2 plays. Bubble teams. I feel really good about this tier, Dale. Like, again, we kind of talked about it last week. I agree with this tier this week as well.
I
Like,
feel good about the tier. I hate the ordering. I think Notre Dame is the best out of this group, and I don't even think it's frankly close.
what makes okay? So I thought about this. I thought about this too. What's the difference between Michigan and Notre Dame right now?
Notre Dame has a much higher ceiling at quarterback. That is fundamentally the hugest difference. I'm not convinced Michigan has a quarterback that, even if he's playing his best, can win you huge games. Like, that still needs to be proven to me. Riley Leonard, like, again, he's played horrible since that A&M game for sure. But I like the way he manages that. Like, I like the way what he adds into that run game. I like the fact that I still think if he plays good football, has a much higher ceiling. So again, I look at very comparable on defense, really, really elite on both ends. I just think Notre Dame, like, if Riley Leonard's playing good, they have more weapons on the outside. They have better running back play. Their offensive line, I think, is coming together to an extent. I don't know what, like, Michigan, the quarterback play is such a huge issue right now. I don't know how you can have them over.
Yeah, I'm with you. And, like, what the AP poll has Michigan as a top 10 team, and again, these are power rankings. These aren't college football playoff rankings. That's why we have USC, or at least I have USC above Michigan. Go back and play that game 10 times. I don't know if Michigan's winning 5 of them. They'll LSU, dangerous.
Below Notre Dame, I like their defense. They just don't have the guys on defense that you need to play at a high level. Like, their offense is great, obviously. They're their defense is like a mid ACC level squad. That's just like the talent on that unit right now, and I don't think there's any way to fix it, frankly. Right
Yeah,
now,
that's my biggest problem with LSU too. Is like I actually like what Blake Baker has brought to this LSU defense, but you got to have personnel play that way. Like if you're going to leave your defensive backs on islands, like you got to have dudes. And I just don't. And you said it best. Like they're like you look at Ole Miss and say, all right, you had offensive struggles. Like you can see that getting fixed because they have the playmakers and the offensive talent to do so. I look at LSU's defense and say, I don't even know if you have the guys to be an elite defense here. And again, you're still dangerous.
they don't even have the guys to be like a particularly good defense.
Yeah, well, I think okay, that fair. Now, I have LSU above all those teams because they're the offense that I trust the most, and that's the offense and quarterback that I trust the most. Utah, don't even want to talk about it. Like Utah's a playoff team. I think they win the Big 12 if Cam Rising is there. If he's not, you don't even like. I think Utah still could probably win, has a chance at winning the Big 12, even without Cam Rising. But man, if Cam Rising is back, like I think this team is really, really dangerous. It's just I'm not playing that Cam Rising game. So just let me know when he's back healthy and on the football field. Then we'll talk about Utah. Outside teams looking in: Iowa State, Oklahoma, BYU, Louisville, Kansas State, Indiana. Gave some love to the group of five: Boise State, UNLV, and Illinois. What team do you want to talk about in terms of what teams you think could maybe continue to be risers out of this group?
Put Louisville and Kansas State in the bubble team, I would say. I think they are much higher ceilings than the other teams I see on this board. And Oklahoma is the tough one for me because frankly, I could see you if you're putting Michigan on the bubble, you probably have to put Oklahoma as well.
Yeah, that's fair.
Look, I mean, they're both the same deficiency. Obviously, Oklahoma is much more centered on having an offensive line that is playing at a very sub-competitive level, let's say, and then quarterback play that's probably not quite good enough right now to solve that issue.
Well, what's Oklahoma's win? Like, what are we hanging on to with Oklahoma that makes me want to put them as a bubble team? Like
I don't think you can even I guess resume. I mean, we're a little early on if they obviously keep losing to the big boys that they play. Yeah, but right now I look at them, I look at Notre Dame, I look at Michigan. I'm like, those look like Spider-Man staring at himself in the mirror. Like those are three similar teams. Well, they have glaring deficiencies on offense. Notre Dame, I think, has the best chance, frankly, to solve it because I do think I have seen with my own eyes, I've seen Riley Leonard play good football. I don't know why he's playing at such a pathetic level right now, but he is, so they belong where they belong. But Michigan and Oklahoma, they're the same team. I
got some venom today on a Tuesday afternoon. I want to talk about Iowa State really quick. This is like that team in the Big 12 that there's so much inconsistency in the Big 12, and that's why I have Iowa State above a team like Kansas State and BYU, quite frankly. Like, I don't know what I'm going to get out of Kansas State from week to week basis. We've seen them look awesome. We've seen them also look really, really bad. Like Iowa State, it's a known commodity for me. And there's a little bit of value in terms of just having a pretty dang high floor. Like, I don't think the ceiling is as high as a team like Kansas State or as a team like Utah. But that floor, man, it's a known commodity. And I think that matters in a conference like the Big 12 where you just don't know what you're going to get from any team any given week.
I'll be honest, I feel like we're hanging a lot on a win over a really bad Iowa team. Like that offense has not fixed itself. Maybe their offensive line and running game's playing at a bit of a higher level than they were last year. But they still have Cade McNamara. They still have an offense that lacks any sort of imagination. Like the wrinkle they've gone to is just throwing a lot of screens, I feel like, this year. So, again, I don't think the firing of Brian Ferentz has really done a whole lot to change anything. Iowa's still Iowa. They gutted one out against Iowa, and that's where we're hanging our hat on. I've seen Kansas State. I've seen Louisville. I've seen BYU even. I've seen Oklahoma. I've seen those teams play some real high-level football games. Iowa State, I just think, is so plain. They're basically just Iowa's cousin in a sense, and
that matters.
I don't want to be anywhere near them in a power rank because they're not good teams.
You like to flash. Like Iowa State, it ain't flash.
I'm a ceiling guy.
It ain't. Yeah, you're a ceiling, but I'm saying like when I'm taking teams in the Big 12, like give me the known commodities. I'm sick and tired of seeing these Big 12. I think a lot of Big 12 fans are probably agreeing. Like Kansas State.
Give me the Big 12 teams that have some juice. I mean, Kansas State, they have something. There's something exciting.
That's fair.
Iowa State is they're okay. We'll get to 7-5 and we'll be happy. Be done.
The last one I want to talk about, the two group of 5 teams, give them some love. Ashton Genty is putting together a season that is
He's a Heisman.
like, Dill, I don't go out of my way to watch a ton of Boise State games, but when I do dive into Boise State, that kid is so incredible. UNLV kind of becoming my team after Matt Sluka, not going to lie.
Everybody's team.
I think they're America's team, so I like that. Indiana's the one where I just can't figure out. I just they look awesome. And you look at the numbers are awesome. They're taking care of business. They look the part. Haven't really been tested. We'll see about India. We're about to go through because they play Nebraska coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll learn about Indiana, but you got to give them the flowers because they've looked like a top 25 team thus far. Dill, we'll close it out there. We're going to see a lot of movement in the next couple of weeks getting into conference play. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.